What's up, YouTube fans? The topic for this video, right, is the evolutionary reducibility of the human ear, right? Showing that the human ear is not, quote, irreducibly complex, that it can be broken down into a series of steps, each useful in its own right, evolutionary steps, each useful in its own right. You can strip away the parts part by part and still have a useful function each step of the way without all the parts together at once. So first off, there's a distinctive shape for the external ear, the external part of the ear, the pinna. There's a distinctive shape to it and positioning to it in anthropoids, including humans, right? So in anthropoids, we commonly see round shape to the ears, a thin folded in helix at the edges, right? Like you notice how like at the edges of our ear, right, you see our helix folded in a very noticeable way. You commonly will see that, we see that in chimp, gorilla, orangutan, but not in most mammals, right? We don't see that in like dog. We don't see that in elephant. Maybe to some small degree, but not in, a much less prominent, noticeable way, right? And also the positioning of the ears, right, in anthropoids is on the center sides of the head, right? Whereas most mammals, right, that is not where the external ears are positioned, right? They're positioned more higher up on the head in most mammals, right? And so in any event, other mammals, right, even though they differ, most of them, their ears differ in that way, their ears still work just fine, right? And then, okay, it is because we are placentals, right, that the parts of our temporal bone are fused, right, by the time we're adults, right? Whereas in marsupials, right, we see that these bones are typically not fused, right? And yet their ears still work just fine, even though it is not fused in them, right? And then it is because we are mammals, specifically therian mammals, which is a group that includes the vast majority of living mammals, it is because of that that we have protruding external ear cartilage, which we would call pinna, right? That's what it's called, is pinna. This is found in most mammals and only mammals. So you're not going to find a single bird, reptile, amphibian, fish, invertebrate, none of them have protruding external ear cartilage. It is unique to mammals, right? And this is actually something that any regular person could have firsthand knowledge of. You don't have to be like when I actually first realized that was the case, no one had told me that was the case. I had never read that it was the case. I just realized it by thinking about it, that I was like, every single animal that I can see its ears on its head is a mammal. Every single one I could think of. And then I looked up, like, is that a trait unique to mammals? And I found that it was, right? And much is the same with the nested hierarchical organization of life. Much of it you could easily have firsthand knowledge of. It's easy to observe. certainly with things outside of the body, whereas internal things you would have to do more of like a dissection. So not every person is gonna have firsthand knowledge of it. But in any event, um, it is also because we are mammals that we have, so by the way, so even though other vertebrates do not have the protruding external ear cartilage that we find in mammals, right? Um, they Most other vertebrates still have fully functional ears. Their ears still work, even though they don't have that, right? So you can take that entire part of the ear out, and the ears still work, right? And then it is also because we are mammals that we have the cochlea of our ears, right? Most other vertebrate groups, aside from the mammals, do not have this, and yet their ears are still fully functional. They still work without the cochlea, right? So you can take that part out, and the ears still work, right? Um, And then there are also two bones unique to the mammalian middle ear that we find in all mammals and only mammals, the malleus and incus bones, right? These are found in the middle ear of all mammals and no non-mammals, right? Um, and so mammals uniquely have three bones of our middle ear, whereas other tetrapods have just one bone, the stapes bone, right? Which mammals also have in addition to the malleus and incus bones, right? And even though other vertebrates do not have the malleus and incus bones, their ears still work. Their ears are still fully functional, right? After all, why do birds, make so much like noises at each other all the time? They obviously can hear, right? Even though they do not have malleus and incus bones, and they still have much of the other parts of the ears, even though they do not have those parts, right? And so you can take those parts out, the ears still work, right? Also, interestingly, there's a number of different lines of evidence that the malleus and incus bones of the mammalian middle ear are actually derived from the articulate and quadrate bones found in most other jawed vertebrates, derived from those respectively, right? So malleus derived from articulate, incus derived from quadrate. Um, which mammals do not have those bones, right? But most other jawed vertebrates do, right? Interestingly, so there's a number of lines of evidence for this. For one thing, during embryonic development, the malleus and incus bones actually start out at a position more like the quadrate and articulate bones, right? Only later into development, migrating into the position that they have later into development, right? That's how it is commonly in placentals, right? In marsupials, since they are not in the womb for anywhere near as long as placentals, they're in the womb for a much shorter time than placentals. They actually are born with those bones still at a position more like that of the quadrant or articulate bones, some of them at least, and then it later into development migrates into the position that it has within most of their life, right? And we also see genetic commonalities between these bones, respectively, indicating that they were derived from the quadrant articulate bones. And we see fossil evidence, right, of a gradual migration of those bones in the synapsid ancestors of mammals, right? So we know from fossils that mammals are the one living member of a much larger group called the cynodonts, which is itself a part of the larger group therapsids, which is itself part of the larger group synapsids. Mammals are the one living member of the much larger synapsid group, and we see, intermediate skeletal forms, right, from more reptile-like skeletons to more mammalian-like skeletons progressively in the fossil record, right, and showing up at the times that we would expect chronologically, right, and we see evidence, right, of the quadrant articulate bones gradually moving, changing shape and size. We see evidence of this in the fossil record, eventually taking on the roles of being the Malleus and Incus bones, right? In any event, moving on, it is because we are tetrapods that we have the middle ear, right? The middle part of the ear, right? And the stapes bone, right? Of the middle ear, right? The middle ear, right, is not found in most fish, right? And yet most fish still have fully functional ears, even though they lack that part of the ear, right? So that whole part of the ear can be taken out as well, and you still have a useful function. The ears still work even without that part. And also the oval window and middle ear, or well, I already listed the middle ear, but the oval window and the round window, and the eustachian tube, all of that, and the tympanic membrane, all of that, again, we have, because we're tetrapods, most fish, they have fully functional ears, but they do not have any of that, right? And yet their ears still work, they're still fully functional, right? And so you can strip away all of those parts as well, and you still have a useful function. The ears still work, right? And then, okay, fish, which is the earliest vertebrates, right? What we see in fish is that their auditory system is part of a larger system called the octavolateralis system, right? Which, in conjunction with the auditory system, also includes in them something called the lateral line system. And both of these systems use specialized mechanoreceptors called hair cells, right? And they are used not only for auditory purposes, but then also they are used for other purposes, like detecting balance, detecting vibration, water movement, and like even beyond the scope of like detecting that through hearing, right? And also electroreception, right? And so the specialized mechanoreceptors that we call hair cells, right, which are a big part of the ear, right, fundamental to the functioning of the ear, these are also useful for other purposes, not even just hearing, right? Even without hearing, they are also useful for other sensory purposes, right? And so when these were first evolved, they did not even have to originally have the function of hearing in order to be useful, right? Because they are just as well useful for these other purposes, right? And as I've talked about in other videos, for showing the reducibility of biological systems, we don't actually need for it to be the same function every step of the way. There's a common fallacy that people will think that it has to be the same function, but it actually doesn't have to be the same function. All that matters is that there's some function that could be favored via natural selection, regardless of if it's the same function or not, right? And then mechanoreceptors more broadly are found in most animals, right? And are even useful for the sense of feel as well, right? So all the more so with mechanoreceptors, they can be useful even, well before used for the sense of hearing, right? And then only later through further specialization, take on the role of being used for hearing, right? And there are obvious, evolutionary advantages that can come from better sense of hearing. If you're an animal roaming around in the wild, having better hearing or not, right, can make a difference of, do you hear the rustling of the leaves as a predator creeps up behind you? Do you hear that in time to, run away in time and not get eaten by it? Or do you not hear it in time and so it eats you? That can make a crucial, difference in how long an animal survives, right? Its chances of living a long life and producing offspring ultimately, right? Other purposes, for social species, it's useful for them to communicate with each other. That's not just something done by humans. Other animals, vocalize. They communicate with each other in ways vital to their survival. Many other animal species, some of them have language to some degree, not as complex as human, but dolphins, for example, right? Have language, right? And so for animals that have, language, that and all the more makes it advantageous for them to have a good sense of hearing, right? And as I explained already, even before it's even used for sense of hearing, much of the parts that now are used for that, right, can be useful for other purposes that can be favored through the process of natural selection, right? So, all right, that's all for now. See you guys.